right, this is part 2. We are still working on week 10, day 2. This is April 21. And so we're going to take a look. We're continuing on here with chapters 16 and 17 is what we're working on today. And we're going to go on and look at some specific examples of pieces of the Romantic era. The first one that we're going to talk about is that new miniature form that I mentioned called Lied. That would be singular, or Lieder would be plural. So it's one of the most distinctive forms of Romantic music. It's an art song is what it is if you're trying to put it in an English translation. It's a composition for solo voice and piano. The accompaniment, which is almost always piano, is an integral part. They are very much characters, or equal characters, in telling the story. The interpretation takes both of them to tell the characters, to tell the program, if you want to think of it that way. They were written to be sung at home, so they're chamber music, although now they are very standard repertoire that you hear in concert halls. Evolved out of Germany, hence that German word Lied. And at the time, it would be almost like what we would consider pop music today, or popular music today. It's an important miniature of the Romantic era. So we mentioned that in the Romantic era, we see with the loosening of form both extremes, grandiose and miniature. So the traits of a leader, the first trait is that accompaniment, that is nearly always accompanied by just a single piano, and that the piano contributes significantly to the story or to the effects. They're definitely partners or collaboration. The piano often sets the mood or the character of the piece. The piano is there to enhance the words or make the text more effective. Low chords might be darkness. The one we're going to listen to, the triplet rhythm, is supposed to sound like horses' hooves. One of the reasons I think piano was chosen with Lied is because it was a common instrument. By this time, most people had a piano in their home, and in particular, many young women studied piano, and so it was a very common parlor after a dinner party or going to visit someone to sit around in the parlor and sing through Lied. And the young women often would play the piano part. The text is usually a romantic poem. More popular ones, of course, have been set by several composers in several different ways. The composers are trying to interpret that poem or imagining it through the music. As far as form, leaders can be strophic, which we've talked about that form many times over the semester, meaning that each stanza or each verse of that poem is set to the exact same music, just like what we saw in a chorale or a hymn. It makes the songs easy to remember. This also enables some of them to use some folk melodies or incorporate some folk melodies. There very often is a refrain that maybe alternates with those stanzas. If the form is not strophic, it's then considered through composed. So if we're saying it's through composed, that's a little bit more flexible. Some composers prefer that for expression. It allows a little bit more word painting. Notice I'm using the word word painting because it's a vocal piece, not program music. And through composed means that it changes with each stanza. So the music is different for each stanza of that poetry. You also can have modified strophic. And modified strophic would be when you've got some sort of combination. So maybe stanzas 1 and 2 are the same, but 3 is different. So there's no restrictions there. That gives a lot of freedom as well. People would often take these lieder, which are very short. They're most often just a couple of minutes, and they would put them into longer groups. So if we wanted to take a group of lieder and put them together, we would call that a song cycle. Song cycle kind of answers that romantic idea of trying to make things grandiose. They might be unified by all the same poet, or they might be unified through poems that are grouped together are telling a story, or maybe they are all poems on the same story, or they're all poems depicting different scenery. but there usually is some sort of storyline that's being unified, or there might be some sort of musical idea that they're unifying. Can be a coherent group of poems, can be poems from several different composers. The advantage to putting these song cycles together is that it extended lead to a larger, more comprehensive, or more impressive unit. It allowed them to go beyond a miniature composition while still writing a miniature composition. Art songs are still written today. Song cycles are still performed in recitals. If we were able to partake of live performances this semester and you were at a vocal recital, there's a great chance that one of the pieces on there would be a song cycle. So the song that we're going to listen to is by Franz Schubert. It's on 236 of your text. It's called Erlkönig. It is a standalone piece that we're going to listen to here. Schubert was born in Vienna. He died very early at 32. Very much fit that mold of a bohemian artist or bohemian existence. He used to write his music write in the mornings. In the afternoons, he played at a lot of coffee shops, and in the evenings, he would concertize. And he was sustained by the fees that he would get from all these odd jobs that he did. Huge output, over 400 works, sacred works, secular works, choral works. There's a mass in there, so masses are still being written. No operas for him, wrote 2 symphonies, but wrote a lot of lied. They're very short, they tend to be quite simple, they all use piano accompaniment. They've got great melodies, and most of his texts that he chooses are on love or nature. So Erlkönig is based on a Danish folk legend of the Erl King. It's a narrative ballad on a poem by Goethe. It was a favorite text. You can find quite a few composers that put this text to music. And it's a story that's telling about a father that's riding through the woods with his son. His son is ill, has a fever. He's trying to get to the doctor, and he's trying to get home with his son here. And the Erl King, who's the king of the elves, this Danish legend, is trying to entice the child to come to him. In other words, he's trying to entice him to death. So what I want you to notice about it is that it's quite long in the fact that there's 8 stanzas. We won't listen to the whole thing together, but it is through composed. So that means with each of these 8 stanzas, there's different music. They're parallel stanzas as far as the number of phrases, but the music is different. The mood changes as the poem goes. The Erlkönig is he's beckoning the child, he's trying to convince him to come. And what you're going to notice is that even though there's one singer singing this, there are many different characters. And what our romantic composers start to do, and Schubert does this really wonderfully, is that every character in this text has a different range, has a different sound. So you'll notice that it starts out with the piano doing triplets. And those triplets, or that rhythm in the right hand, that's the horses. That's that horse's hoofs as the horses are going down the street here. The narrator starts by telling the story about who rides so late through night and wind. It is the father with his child. He grasps the boy in his arm. And that narrator has kind of a medium range voice, but it's in minor. When the father starts speaking, the pitch or the range goes much lower. And he's saying, "My son, what makes you afraid to look?" When the child speaks, you'll notice that the range goes very high. So you can hear a difference between when it's the father and when it's the son. When the elf king comes in, the one that's trying to cajole, notice that both the accompaniment change, so there the piano again is trying to reinforce that change in character, and it goes to major for what that positive or enticing Erl King is trying to do. The continuity of the piece is held together definitely by that triplet rhythm in the piano that goes the entire piece. I can tell you as a pianist, it's challenging to play, but that's the horse continuing to ride all the way through. Father. Here's the child speaking, lighter, higher range, softer. Father, lower. Here's the Earl King, major, gentle, more enticing. I won't tell you the rest of the story. I'll let you listen and you can see if the father gets home safely with the child or if the Earl King wins out. I encourage you to listen to it first and then go back and listen following the text and see if you could tell just by the change in mood, the change in key, the change in voice types, what you think happens with the story, and then read the translation and see. The next lead that we're going to look at is by Robert Schumann. Schumann is another wonderful example of a romantic composer that has a lot of literature out there. He wrote instrumental works, he wrote vocal works, he wrote masses, he wrote symphonies, everything that's out there. He usually wrote things that were quite biographical about things that were going on in his life. He liked to use descriptive titles or texts, or again, that idea of program music. He married Clara Wieck Schumann, who was the first female concert pianist, so very unique there, and she premiered a lot of his works. Schumann suffered from depression and mental health. He spent a lot of time in mental institutions. There are numerous accounts of suicide attempts. He led a difficult life. There's a couple different things that I want to bring up about him. The first one is that we've got a song cycle here on page 239 for you to listen to. So the song cycle itself is called Dichterliebe, which means a poet's love. And the songs are, he wrote them as a gift to his wife Claire when they got married. They were inspired by a book of songs or a book of poems that he read. They are not in sequential order, but they are all talking about love. It starts out with an old knight who's pining for his lost love and then is rejected in his disillusionment. And by the last poem, which is talking about the wonderful month of May, it has more of a romantic quality and more of a resolution to it. So the first one that we're going to listen to is in that wonderful month of May. And this is a very short one. There's only 2 stanzas to it. You're going to notice that it's strophic because it has the exact same melody, the exact same accompaniment both times. Notice how the piano again is an equal partner. The piano is going up with some questioning phrases and it's resolving as it sets the mood into that next song. very short piano interlude, and then it goes right into stanza 2, which you'll notice is exactly the same, hence that strophic form. The next song that's on your canvas is the Die Alten Buserluden. So this is the final song of that cycle. And as you listen to this one, notice how this one has a through composed. There's some similarities in the shapes of the phrases, but each one is different. The piano ends by itself, rather meditative. Notice that this one ends very sadly. That sixth stanza is talking about a funeral. See if you can hear that in what the composer chooses for harmony and for tone color. As I mentioned, his wife was Clara Schumann, a virtuoso pianist. It was unusual to be a concert female pianist at this time. It was even more unusual to be recognized for your composing ability. So I want to just mention her briefly, that here we have a composer that is a female. You can find a nice biography about her on page 242. And on 243, it has one of her pieces that you can listen to. So she wrote a lot of her songs, again, in a biographical nature too. A lot of them were for her husband, for Robert, for birthday gifts. And this is often referred to, Clara and Robert Schumann, as one of music's greatest love stories. She didn't write a lot, and especially once they got married and she started having children, she didn't do a lot of writing, still did some concertizing. So what's different about this that I want to point out is that this is a song cycle, and the fact that it's 6 songs that are together, but it does not follow sequential, it does not have a theme, it's 6 songs that are all separate. So she named it Sechs Lieder instead of giving it Dichterlieder, like we saw with Roberts, a title for the entire song cycle telling what the entire song cycle was about. This is a group of pieces together, set of 6, that she simply calls Opus 13, set of 6. You can easily hear in this piece a modified strophic form, where that first stanza and second stanza are alike, and the third stanza is different. So here's your second stanza, exactly the same. Here comes your third stanza. Notice how it's a little different now. So melody is changing ever so slightly, but enough that you could call this a modified strophic form. So with all these miniatures, these Lied taking place in the vocal world, let's talk just for a second about what's happening with piano, because that is the new popular go-to instrument of the Romantic period. And so we have a lot of miniature pieces being written for the piano by a lot of these same Romantic composers that are writing miniature vocal works. Miniature piano pieces, like Lied, are short, programmatic pieces without a text. So trying to get a mood across, trying to get a story across with tone color, with meter, with line. Most of them are short, most of them are under 5 minutes, and most of them are very popular with amateurs. They weren't real difficult, so you could sit down and play them. There were those, of course, that were very virtuosic that you found more towards the concert stage. Most of the time they had titles that were very descriptive and that gave you some indication of what picture or what story you were trying to tell. Your book goes through quite a few different types of pieces that you can read about: nocturnes, polonaises, etudes, telling you, that a nocturne tends to be slow, and a night piece of polonaise is a Polish dance, and etudes working on specific technical fingering, waltz is a stylized dance. So read the descriptions. I did not put examples of all of these on Canvas, but you can go into YouTube and take any romantic composer, Chopin, and put the word etude, and you'll get lots of wonderful examples that you can listen to. What I did put on was an example of a Schubert piece of a Moment Musicale. So this is, I would put it in the form of a nocturne. It has a very sad melody. It's a very simple ABA form. The texture changes from dark or cloudiness to more brightness. I think he's telling a story here that you can put your own take on. You have on your text in page 244 a nice place that you can follow through with that. I'm going to let you listen to that one on your own. What I would like you to listen to is an example by Schumann, and I've put an interesting, what I think is interesting on Canvas here for you, take on this. So as you can see, it's a speaker who will play as well. But Schumann, we just listened to some of his vocal pieces, as we said, was a wonderful pianist as well, and his wife as well, who probably premiered this. And here's a group of short piano character pieces that he put together called Carnival. It's 20 short pieces. Carnival was describing the festival before Lent, or what we probably think of more as Mardi Gras. And these 20 pieces are musical portraits of people that he actually knew at a masked ball. So for instance, there's one of the pieces is describing himself as Schumann. One of them is describing Paganini and Chopin. One of them is describing a clown. One of them is a pantomimer. So there's some wonderful character descriptions here. This is a very interesting piece. I encourage you to take a listen to. But what I want to point out, and I mentioned this with Schumann, that he had a lot of mental health issues. He had some split personality issues going on, and two of his personalities were Eusebius and Florestan, and he actually gave them individual movements. And the movements tell a lot about what type of emotional state that character was in. So Eusebius, he would often write works and sign them as Eusebius. It was a pen name that he often used when he was in one of these introspective places. Usually a major, usually have very vague rhythms. He had another persona of Florestan, which was his more impetuous side, often minor, often a little bit more of an unrest. And so this fellow, this gentleman here on Aspen Health's lecture that I found, gives a nice description of Florestan and Eusebius and the characters, and plays a little bit of the two movements from this carnival. So I encourage you to take a listen to this. It's interesting, I think, not only from a musical perspective, but also from a psychological perspective. The last piano piece that we'll take a listen to and talk about today is by Chopin. That will be the next one that shows up on your canvas. And the reason I bring this up is Chopin is synonymous with piano romantic music. Chopin is probably one of the most revered and loved piano composers. He's born in Poland, but spent most of his adult life in France. He was very much influenced by the writers of the day. He was a piano virtuoso, but he disliked performing in public. And he is the one that really perfected, I think, one of these types of miniature pieces, and in particular, the nocturne. So that nocturne being a singing melodic line with gentle accompaniments. He also wrote many preludes, mazurkas, polonaises, etudes, all of those miniature pieces that you can read about in your book. Chopin, if you're trying to teach someone what rubato is or to play with rubato, Chopin is the epitome of rubato. So as you listen to this nocturne in F sharp, there is a guide for it on page 245 in your text and a nice biography of Chopin on 246. I want you to listen to not only the elegance of the line, but the romantic harmony, which I would say is lush, a little bit more dissonant. Notice how he will have tension and then resolution in a much more forward way than what we saw in the Baroque and the Classical. Listen to how he treats the melody. Each time it returns in an improvisational way, he changes it, he adds ornamentation, similar to what we've seen in the vocal world up until this point. So I'm hoping you're hearing how this rhythm is a little bit freer. That's that idea of rubato. It seems to grow in an organic or more improvisational way. So really a lovely, lovely, beautiful piece. I encourage you to explore more of Chopin's pianistic works. They're just gorgeous. I think you will enjoy them. So we've talked a lot about these miniature works of Lied, these miniature works of piano pieces. What's going on in the grandiose scale? Well, if we look at the instrumental world, we have concert overtures being written. So we've heard the word overture before. As we were venturing into opera, most operas started with an overture, or the orchestra, or the pit, if you will, playing a piece using the themes of the opera, setting the scene, setting the tone. Now we start to see overtures that are written not in conjunction with an opera, but just as a standalone piece. Program music, it goes right along with that idea. It was never intended to be followed by a stage or a play, but it's usually one movement, usually in a sonata form. The symphony also takes this idea of program. And we start to see program symphonies. So symphonies that are meant to tell a story. And perhaps the most unique one to share with you is the Symphonie Fantastique by Berlioz. This has 5 movements, so grandiose in the way that he has extended that form. Berlioz was not only a great composer, he is one of the first great conductors. Most of his important works have a text or a program. He was known to give out pamphlets saying this is what each movement is about, this is what you should be listening for. He wrote a lot of journal articles in the music world. He was an orchestrator, he was a conductor. So his unconventional music kind of irritated the opera world, but in the instrumental world, it was quite intriguing. His orchestration is very imaginative in what he uses for instruments to portray different characters. He used an idea called idea fixative, or fixe, depending on what form you want to use of it. And it is similar to what we would say that mode of consistency was with Beethoven. except for that he's a little bit more obsessive about it. And he usually gives it a certain character, or it's a certain form. It's a single theme, and it occurs in all movements. And in this case, in the Symphonie Fantastique, it is his wife that is the idea fixative. So you've got wonderful explanation, much better than what I could do trying to explain this on video chat for you. Starting on page 249, you've got a wonderful biography about Berlioz and the symphony. It takes you through very easily each of the movements, what's happening at the movements. It's a masked ball, so it's almost an autobiographical piece, and he's talking about the unrequited love of his wife here, Harriet Smithson. And so it starts out with the first movement that's very sorrowful, that gives way to passion. It's about how he was an artist before he met his beloved and he was lost. The second movement announces her arrival and the volcanic love and fits of jealousy, as there's other characters in it. It takes them to a ball. The third movement takes you to a scene in the country. The fourth is a march to the scaffold, where there's nightmares. There's a clarinet that plays this idea fixe that you'll hear very, very easily. And that fifth movement, probably the most recognizable, is that dance of the Witches' Sabbath. And so it's a very dark piece. There's actually a Dies Irae melody, which is your all the way back to chant, which is the melody used for funeral processions. That is at the end of this, which is Berlioz portraying himself at his own funeral. So, and it ends with some funeral bells. So it's a very unique piece. It's still performed very often today. It's a complex story that I think reading through your text, they do a nice job explaining it. Follow with your text as you go through each movement. I picked some examples on Canvas that instead of showing the orchestra, is showing some depictions of that program or that story that Berlioz was hoping that you would see. So I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at this romantic trend of both miniature and grandiose pieces today. Remember to take your quiz for today, which would be on week 10, day 2 for April 21st, open from 8 a.m. till 11:59 p.m. Enjoy.